If Mom disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. My daughter-in-law said that at the dinner party the night before the wedding, while the diamond necklace I had just given her was still sparkling under the Malibu lights, she didn't whisper it, just quiet enough for people to think it was a joke, but clear enough for me to hear every single word. My son was standing right beside her. He took a sip of his drink, smiled at the guests, and pretended his mother didn't exist. That night I didn't argue. I simply walked my wife out of the party in silence and began closing the doors on everything we had spent 40 years building together. If this is the first time you're hearing my story, consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next ones. And I'm curious about one small thing. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment with your city or your country. I always enjoy reading them, wondering which strangers out there are listening along with me in this moment. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened in the days leading up to that wedding. I've grown used to attending parties where I never quite belonged. That night in Malibu was no different. The rehearsal dinner before the wedding was held at a seaside villa, a place that looked straight out over the ocean. About 50 guests had already arrived. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, soft lights hanging across the wooden terrace. The servers moved quietly, almost without a sound. Everything was neat, polished, exactly what people like to call elegant. I stood near the edge of the room, by the glass doors facing the ocean. The suit I was wearing was 10 years old. I had kept it since the day Mark graduated from college. The stitching at the cuffs had begun to fray a little, but I never thought that mattered. I was used to not spending money on myself. Instead, I usually spent it on the things my son believed were necessary. Tuition, the first investment that helped him start his company. Expenses Mark always called just temporary. That night was the same. In my jacket pocket, I still had the receipt for the diamond necklace. $45,000. I bought it 3 weeks earlier, after Laura mentioned to Luna that she had always dreamed of wearing a necklace like that on her wedding day. I remember clearly when Luna heard that. She simply smiled, the same quiet smile she had worn for many years. The kind of smile that carried patience and a little silence. When Laura walked into the party, every head turned. Her white dress fit perfectly. Her hair had been styled with care, and the diamond necklace rested right at the center of her neck, shining under the lights. I noticed it the moment she stepped down the stairs. Laura touched the necklace, turning it slightly as if checking how it caught the light. A few of her friends gathered around, admiring it. I heard the usual comments. Perfect. That necklace must be expensive. Laura just smiled. She never mentioned who had bought it. Luna stood a few steps away. She wore a pale blue dress, something that had been in the closet for quite some time. No diamonds, no flashy jewelry, just a simple dress, clean and modest. I watched Laura walk toward her. She tilted her head, smiling as if she were about to say something friendly. Then she said the words I heard. If Mom disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Luna stood still. She didn't react right away. For a moment I wondered if she hadn't heard it. Then I saw her hand tighten slightly around the glass of water she was holding. Laura continued speaking, still smiling. People here only care about the glamorous things. Mom, and him too. She glanced in my direction. The two of you belong somewhere quieter. Not here. She said it gently, as if it were nothing more than a casual remark. I turned to look at Mark. My son was standing right beside Laura, a glass of wine in his hand. When she finished speaking, he just gave a small laugh, the kind of laugh people make when they hear something too minor to bother with. Then Mark turned and began talking to another guest. No objection, no surprise, nothing at all, just silence. Luna turned her face away slightly. I could see the moisture in her eyes, though she tried to stay composed. She placed the glass back on the table. I walked over and rested my hand gently on her shoulder. Let's step outside for a moment, I said. My voice was quiet. I didn't want attention. Luna nodded. We walked across the dining room. No one stopped us. No one asked where we were going. People were still chatting, raising their glasses, laughing softly under the warm lights. Out on the terrace, the ocean wind was stronger. The sound of waves hitting the rocks drifted up from below. It was much quieter out here than inside. Luna leaned lightly against the wooden railing. I'm sorry, she said softly. I looked at her. For what? For making you hear those words. I shook my head. It wasn't the first time I had heard Laura say something like that. Tonight, she had simply been more direct, and Mark had heard it. That was the part that stayed in my mind. I took my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up in my hand. Luna looked at me a little surprised. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked back through the glass doors. The party was still going. Laughter, glasses clinking, soft music. A perfect celebration for tomorrow. At least, that's what everyone believed. I opened my contact list. There were a few calls I had prepared in advance, just in case they were ever needed. Until now, I had always hoped I would never have to make them. But after what I had just heard, a simple question began to form in my mind. If my daughter-in-law truly believed that our disappearance would go unnoticed, then what would happen if everything they were standing on, we disappeared with us? I stood out on the terrace for quite a while after. The first call. The ocean in Malibu is quieter at night than it is during the day. The wind carried the scent of salt, drifting softly past the wooden railing. Inside, the party continued, as if nothing had happened. Laughter and music slipped through the glass doors. I looked down at my phone again. The second call lasted less than a minute. The man on the other end didn't ask many questions. We had worked that way for many years. The moment I said my name, he understood what I was asking. "I want to activate the suspension clause," I said. A short pause. Then he answered simply, "Understood." The call ended. I stood there a moment longer, then turned to Luna. She was still looking out over the dark ocean. The lights from the villa glowed behind us. "Let's go home," I said. Luna nodded. She didn't ask anything more. We walked back inside. No one paid much attention as we passed through the dining room. A few guests were raising their glasses to Laura. The diamond necklace still glittered around her neck under the lights. Laura didn't look our way. Mark didn't either. We crossed the room like two guests who had arrived a little early and decided to leave a little early. My old pickup truck was parked in the lot behind the villa. It looked strangely out of place among the polished new cars belonging to the guests. Luna settled into the passenger seat. When I started the engine, she finally spoke. "Tomorrow will still happen, won't it?" she asked. I kept my eyes on the coastal road ahead. Not the way they expect. We drove back to our old house in silence. It was the home we had lived in for more than 30 years. Not large, but quiet. That night, we didn't take much with us. Just one small suitcase. Luna folded a few sets of clothes. I collected a handful of documents from the drawer in my study. Most of our belongings remained exactly where they had always been. Before we left, I stepped back into the master bedroom. On Luna's dressing table sat a red envelope. I had placed it there before we locked the door. Inside was a copy of the rental contract for the Malibu villa, and a short note, only a few lines. I didn't think Laura would read it that night, but the next morning, she certainly would. We left the house before midnight. The pickup truck rolled along the dark coastal road. Streetlights were scattered and distant. The ocean waves murmured somewhere far off. Luna leaned her head against the window. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. I knew what she meant. 40 years ago, when Mark was still a little boy, I promised myself I would always help him stand on his own feet. And for many years, I kept that promise. But sometimes, helping someone stand makes them forget how to do it themselves. "I'm only closing things that were never truly theirs," I said. Luna didn't reply. The next morning, my phone started vibrating very early. The first call came at 7 o'clock. It was Mark. I let it ring for a moment before answering. "Dad, where are you?" His voice sounded tense. "Do you know what's happening?" I sat beside the window of the small house we had rented for the time being. "What's happening?" I asked. "My cards are being declined everywhere," Mark said quickly. "The company accounts too. The bank says the system has been frozen." I looked out at the quiet street. Mornings in this neighborhood were peaceful. "Maybe they're reviewing a few clauses," I said. Mark was silent for a few seconds. "You need to call them right now," he said. "Today is my wedding day." I didn't answer right away. On the other end of the line, I could hear Laura saying something urgently. Then Mark continued. "There's something else. The villa manager just called. He said the rental contract has been canceled. They want everyone out before noon." I nodded slightly, though Mark couldn't see me. "I know." "You know," Mark's voice rose. "Did you do this?" I didn't deny it. Silence stretched between us. "You can't do this," Mark said. "There are more than 50 guests here. The film crew, the makeup team, everyone is waiting. Then they should go home, I said. You're ruining my wedding. I sat a little straighter. No, I said slowly. I'm just stopping the funding. Mark let out a sharp breath. You're overreacting because of one meaningless comment last night. I remembered Laura's voice on the terrace. If Mom disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. My voice remained calm. Maybe to you it was meaningless, I said. To me, it was very clear. Mark started to say something else, but I had already ended the call. My phone vibrated a few more times after that. I didn't answer. About an hour later, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. Just a photo. In the picture, the lobby of the Malibu villa was filled with guests. A group of staff members were speaking with them. Several suitcases had already been pulled outside. The message beneath the photo was short. The contract has been closed as requested. I set the phone down on the table. Luna was sitting across from me, holding a warm cup of tea. So, the party is over, she asked. I looked at her for a moment. No, I said quietly. It's only just beginning, and I knew very well. Mark and Laura were not going to let things end there. That morning passed slowly. Luna sat near the window while I went over a few documents that had been prepared ahead of time. The small house we had rented for the moment sat on a quiet street, just a few blocks from the ocean. Not many cars passed by. Now and then the wind drifted through the trees in front of the porch. Close to noon, I heard the sharp sound of brakes outside the gate. It was a familiar enough sound. I already knew who had arrived. Luna looked at me. Mark, she asked. I closed the folder and placed it on the table. Most likely. Less than 10 seconds later, the front door was pushed open. Quick footsteps echoed through the living room. Mark appeared in the doorway. His shirt was still neatly pressed from the morning, but the confidence he wore the night before was gone. Laura stood right behind him. Her hair was still carefully styled, though her makeup had faded quite a bit. Mark looked around the small room, as if searching for something familiar. What are you doing, Dad? He said almost immediately. I didn't stand. I simply gestured toward the chair across from me. Mark didn't sit. You freeze my accounts, cancel the villa contract, and disappear all night. Do you think this is some kind of joke? His voice was louder than usual. Laura stepped forward. Do you have any idea what we had to deal with this morning? She said. Everyone kept asking what was going on. You made us look ridiculous. I studied the two of them for a moment. For years, Mark had grown used to walking into a room and finding everything already arranged for him. Perhaps this was the first time he had stepped into a room where things were no longer on his side. Did you come here to talk? I said slowly, or just to shout? Mark clenched his hands. I need you to unlock my accounts, he said. Right now. Laura nodded immediately. And call the villa manager. They can't just throw us out like that. I glanced at the small table beside my chair. A thick brown envelope sat there. I picked it up and placed it gently in front of Mark. Before we talk about the accounts, I said there are a few things you should look at. Mark opened the envelope with clear irritation. Inside were several neatly printed contracts. He flipped open the first page. When he reached the third line, his expression changed. What is this? Mark asked. Loan documents, I replied. Mark flipped to the next page. Laura leaned closer to read. That's not right, Mark said. That company is mine. Of course, I said. But where did the original capital come from? Mark didn't answer immediately. So I continued. When you started the company 5 years ago, you told me the bank refused your loan application. Your financial record wasn't strong enough. So I stepped in and provided the funds. I remember, Mark said, but you said it was help. I said it was a loan, I corrected calmly. With conditions. Laura stared at me in disbelief. You're joking, right? She said. Who writes contracts with their own son? I do. The room grew even quieter. Mark kept turning the pages. On the final page, both signatures were there. His and mine. He looked up. You can't activate this clause, Mark said. The company is operating. I'm not closing the company, I said. I'm only pausing the funding you've been using. Laura crossed her arms. Fine, she said. We still have the car. I nodded slowly. That car has paperwork too. Mark searched through the envelope again. After a few seconds, he found the vehicle registration. The owner's name sat on the first line. Robert Hayes. Mark stared at the name for a long moment. You said that car was a wedding gift, he said. I said it would be a gift when you were ready to stand on your own, I replied. Those two things aren't exactly the same. Laura exhaled sharply. You're trying to corner us, she said. I shook my head. No, I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine. Mark placed the documents back on the table. So, what do you want? He asked. That question came out slower, but heavier than everything before it. I looked directly at my son. The car keys, I said. Mark didn't move. And the credit card you've been using, I added. Laura let out a dry laugh. You're serious? I didn't answer her. Mark looked at Laura, then back at me. Finally, he reached into his pocket and placed the car keys on the table. The sound of metal touching wood was small, but in that quiet room it was clear. I reached out and took them. The card, I said. Slowly, Mark set the credit card beside the keys. At that moment, I noticed a few neighbors standing out on the porch. They had probably heard the raised voices earlier. No one spoke. Laura glanced around the room, then looked back at me with a colder expression than the night before. You think this ends here, she said. I stood up and picked up the envelope. No, I said, but from now on, everything will be much clearer. Mark didn't say another word. He turned and walked out the door. Laura followed behind him, her heels tapping sharply against the wooden floor. The door closed. The room fell quiet again. Luna looked at me for a moment. Are you all right? She asked. I set the car keys down on the table. I'm all right, I said, but I knew one thing very clearly. When people grow used to living in a house built with someone else's money, the moment that house disappears is rarely the end. More often, it's when the truth finally begins to show. After that day, Mark never called me again. Laura didn't either. Our little house slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. In the mornings, I made coffee. Luna sat by the window reading a book, sometimes pausing to ask me what day it was. Questions like that used to worry me, but lately I've learned to answer them more gently. 1 week passed, then 2. During that time, I heard news about Mark through very ordinary channels. An old friend at the bank called to ask if everything was all right. Another acquaintance mentioned that Mark's company was struggling because several payments had been suspended. I didn't comment. Those things were no longer in my hands. Near the end of the month, I received an invitation. It was a simple card from a community organization in downtown Los Angeles. They were hosting a fundraising event for a program that supports elderly people living alone. I had worked with them a few years earlier. Luna held the invitation for quite a while after I gave it to her. We should go, she said. Are you sure? I asked. She nodded. I'd like to get out for a bit. So one evening early the next month, we drove into the city. The event was held in a large hall near downtown. Not nearly as luxurious as the parties in Malibu, but everything was tidy and respectful. About 100 guests were there. A few local reporters had shown up as well. Luna wore a cream-colored coat she liked very much. When we walked in, one of the organizers recognized me right away. He shook my hand firmly. We're very grateful you came, he said. I simply nodded. We were guided to the front row, not because I had asked, but because the organizers said the main donors should sit close to the stage. Luna looked a little surprised. Did you donate something? She asked quietly. I helped a little, I said. She didn't ask anything more. The evening began quite normally. A few short speeches about programs helping elderly people who had been forgotten by their communities. Then a short video introducing some of the people receiving support. I glanced around the hall. And then I noticed 2 familiar faces near the back of the room. Mark and Laura. They were standing near the reception table, speaking with someone from the organizing team. Laura wore a dark dress, nothing like the glamorous look she had worn at the Malibu party. Mark looked a little thinner. Maybe they didn't know I would be there, or perhaps they came because they believed someone here might help them. A moment later, Laura saw me. She froze for a few seconds. Then she said something to Mark. The 2 of them began walking toward the front row. I didn't look away. By the time they reached the stage area, the program was nearly finished. The host was thanking the evening's major donors. Laura suddenly quickened her steps. Before I could react, she had already climbed the small steps onto the stage. The host looked startled. Excuse me, ma'am, you are Laura, turned toward the audience. Her voice filled the microphone as she picked it up. I just want to say a few words, she said. The room quickly grew attentive. Laura looked straight at me. There's someone here tonight I think people should know about, she said. A father who decided to abandon his own son because of a small misunderstanding. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Mark stood below the stage and did nothing to stop her. Laura continued. He froze our accounts, took everything back, and left us to struggle on our own. I don't believe that's how a family should treat each other. She paused, as if waiting for a reaction, Many eyes slowly turned toward Luna and me. Luna remained seated beside me. I stood up, not in a hurry. I went to the stage while Laura was still holding the microphone. The host looked confused, but he didn't interfere. Laura stepped back slightly. "So now you want to talk?" she asked. I didn't answer that. Instead, I turned to the technician standing near the large screen behind the stage. "May I show a short video?" I asked. He looked toward the organizers, then nodded. I took a small USB drive from my pocket and handed it to him. The hall grew quieter as the screen behind us lit up. The video began. The image shook slightly, like it had been recorded on a phone. A familiar scene appeared, the terrace of the Malibu villa, warm yellow lights, music drifting from inside. Laura stood in front of Luna, and her voice came through very clearly. If Mom disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. In the video, Mark stood right beside her, holding a glass of wine, silent. Nothing had been cut. Nothing had been edited, just exactly what happened. When the video ended, the hall remained silent. Laura stood beside me now, her face no longer holding the confidence she had earlier. I looked out at the audience. Then I said something very simple. "I didn't abandon my family," I said quietly. I just stopped pretending that respect was still there. After the video ended, the hall remained quiet for quite a while. Not the kind of silence that feels uncomfortable. It was the kind that settles in when people have just seen something and are still trying to understand it. Laura was still standing beside me on the stage, but she was no longer holding the microphone. Her hands tightened around the edge of her dress, her eyes drifting across the rows of seats below. Mark stepped up a few stairs toward the stage, then stopped. Perhaps he realized there wasn't much left to explain. I didn't say anything else. The host walked over and gently took the microphone back. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. I nodded, then stepped down from the stage. Luna was still sitting in the front row. When I returned to my seat, she placed her hand over mine. She didn't say a word, but the light squeeze told me everything I needed to know. The program continued a few minutes later. The organizers moved on to the final announcements about the evening's donations. I didn't pay much attention to the numbers being read from the stage. Instead, I looked around the room. A few people were still whispering to each other. A couple of reporters were writing something down in their notebooks. Laura and Mark had moved. I spotted them near the exit. Laura was saying something to Mark, quickly, almost urgently. Mark didn't answer much. After a few minutes, the two of them walked out of the hall. The door closed behind them. Luna watched for a moment, then turned to me. "Do you feel lighter now?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Maybe," I said. "Not because I needed to prove anything. Some truths simply need to be placed where they belong." The evening ended peacefully. Before we left, the director of the charity came to speak with me again. He thanked me for the contribution I had sent earlier. "We're going to use this funding to open several small apartments for elderly people who no longer have a stable place to live," he said. I nodded. "As long as they have somewhere quiet," I replied. On the drive home, Luna stayed quiet for quite a while. The city lights drifted past the car windows. Long rows of streetlights stretched across the boulevard, then slowly grew thinner as we left downtown behind. Finally, Luna spoke. "You don't regret it, do you?" I knew what she meant. For many years, Mark had been our only son. I had spent most of my life making sure he had better opportunities than I did. But there are things parents cannot do for their children. "No," I said. I paused, then added softly, "I just hope one day he understands." Luna nodded. We didn't speak much during the rest of the drive. The months that followed were quiet. I heard small pieces of news about Mark now and then. His company had shrunk. A few employees had left. Mark and Laura moved into a smaller apartment on the east side of the city. No one was pushed out of life. Things simply returned to their true size. As for Luna and me, things changed in a different way. Most of the money left from our earlier plans I transferred into the fund that organization was building. They decided to name the program Harbor House, a quiet place for elderly people who no longer had family close by. Luna loved the name. A few months later, we visited the first building they opened. It wasn't large, but it had a small garden in front and a row of wooden benches facing a tree-lined street. A few elderly residents had already moved in. Luna sat down on one of the benches, watching the leaves move gently in the wind. "Better than Malibu," she said softly. I smiled. I think so too. That afternoon, when the sun began to sink lower, we drove out to the coast. Not Malibu, just a quieter beach, with fewer people. Luna walked slowly along the edge of the water. I walked beside her. The ocean breeze carried the familiar sound of waves. I reached into my jacket and took out an old photograph. It was taken the day Mark and Laura announced their engagement. The four of us stood together in the frame. I looked at the photo for a long moment. Then I tore it into a few small pieces, not out of anger. Sometimes, certain memories simply need to close, so calmer days can begin. The pieces of paper drifted away in the ocean, wind, slowly disappearing into the air. Luna took my hand. We stood there for a long time, watching the water change color under the evening light. After everything that happened, I learned something quite simple. A family is not built from numbers in a bank account. It's built on respect. And when someone chooses to treat their parents as if they are invisible, they are also walking away from the future that family once prepared for them. As for Luna and me, we finally found something we had forgotten for a very long time: peace. If my story made you pause and think a little about family, about respect between parents and children, I hope you might take a moment to like the video. You can also subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this. Simple stories that sometimes reflect very real parts of life. And if you believe this story might help someone take a closer look at their own family relationships, feel free to share it with them. Thank you for spending your time listening to my story, all the way to the very end.